good afternoon. The Secretary General and the President of Poland will make opening statements, and then we'll take some questions both from the room and online. Secretary General.
President Duda, dear Andrzej, welcome back to NATO Headquarters. It's always a pleasure to receive you here. Poland is a committed NATO ally, contributing to our shared security in many different ways, including with troops for our missions and operations, regular contributions to air and maritime patrols, and with a leading example on defense spending. There is also a lot of NATO in Poland, including a multinational battle group as part of our defensive presence in the region, as well as our multinational core northeast, and a site for our ballistic missile defense. So Poland stands with NATO, and NATO stands with Poland. We just had a very good discussion about current security challenges, including Russia's continued military buildup near Ukraine, and the situation on the border between Belarus and Poland, Latvia and Lithuania. All NATO allies have made clear that they strongly condemn the Lukashenko's regime's exploitation of vulnerable people to pressure neighbouring countries. This is inhumane and cynical, and we stand in full solidarity with the allies affected. We also addressed the Russian military buildup near Ukraine's borders. We see large and unusual concentration of forces combined with aggressive rhetoric and disinformation from Moscow. So we call on Russia to be transparent, reduce tensions, and de-escalate. NATO remains vigilant, and we continue to provide Ukraine with political and practical support. This is not a threat to Russia, and it helps Ukraine to defend itself from aggression. NATO foreign ministers will meet in Riga next week. They will assess the security situation and meet with the Ukrainian and Georgian counterparts. Another strong sign of our support. So, President Duda, thank you again for coming today. I look forward to working with you to strengthen our alliance as we prepare for the upcoming summit in Madrid. So please welcome.
Ekscelencjo, Panie Sekretarzu Generalny, Szanowni Państwo.
Your Excellency, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, for this fast-working consultation that we have had today. Thank you for showing this very swift readiness to have a meeting with me here in Brussels at NATO headquarters. And thank you for your readiness to speak with me about the current situation. Thank you for your readiness to listen also to the first-hand information from somebody who is active every day and who serves as public servant in this part of Europe, which today is in a special situation. On the Polish border right now, we are seeing a hybrid attack which is being carried out all the time from the Belarusian side. Without any doubt whatsoever, this attack is supported by the Russian authorities. I have described to Mr. Secretary General the current situation right now, informing him that in the last days and hours, this way of the hybrid impact that we have felt on the Polish border, on the border of the European Union, but also on the eastern flank of NATO, has changed. The methods have changed, evolving from a frontal attack, which one could follow in the world media a couple of days ago, when groups of hundreds of thousands, actually, of migrants were attacking the border while it was defended by the Polish police officers and Polish border guards. This situation has now changed. The Belarusian regime has relocated migrants to the warehouses, which are heated, and right now the attacks against the Polish border have been happening by smaller groups at night. Those groups include tens or hundreds of persons. But to give you a detailed view of the situation, over the last 3 days, we have had illegal attempts to cross the Polish border. It was connected also with an attack on the Polish border, and we have registered more than 750 such attacks, which is a significant number. Right now, these attacks happen at night, and quite often these are clashes of a small scale, one can say, speaking about the number of persons involved. Nevertheless, their intensity is much more dangerous than it was the case a few days ago, because those migrants who illegally attack the border, because this is happening outside of any legal border crossings, are equipped quite often with dangerous instruments. They have got knives, they have got different kind of metal bars. Quite often they also have got tear gas. So all of these are means and measures which without any doubt have been supplied to them by militarized Belarusian forces, because otherwise how would migrants equip themselves with tear gas? So, having said that, we are confronted with such situations which we interpret also as provocations, which we are afraid could turn into escalation of force through opening fire even from the Belarusian side, be it by migrants or by the Belarusian forces. Under different guises. And I also reported to Mr. Secretary General that unfortunately we have seen this dangerous evolution of the situation on the border. Unfortunately, the current developments don't let us speak about de-escalation of the tension on the border. Although, as I said before, a couple of days ago we were able to see spectacular attacks on the border in the media, but they are not there now. But the pressure on the border is continuing, and we're afraid that due to the change of the method of the hybrid attack on the border, this situation might continue for months. Nevertheless, I assured Mr. Secretary General that all the time this is of civilian nature, and our border guards are able to prevent those attacks, our police officers as well. They are also supported by the Polish soldiers, by Polish military units deployed to support Polish border guards and Polish police officers. Nevertheless, we are prepared to repel any kinds of attacks. The services are there on the border. They're going to stay there. I can assure you we are going to continue to defend the border of the European Union. We will continue to defend also the border of the North Atlantic Alliance. In this context, I also presented to Mr. Secretary General generally the security situation that we're dealing with right now on the eastern flank, in the broad meaning of the word. I also reported information that we have been receiving concerning the security of Ukraine. Indeed, what we can see is the relocation of Russian forces around the Ukrainian border, both in its northern part, where Ukrainian borders on Belarus, but also in the vicinity of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, in the vicinity of Crimea. So one could say that this is happening along the entire border of the Ukrainian and Russian-Belarusian border. Along these borders, we can see the movements of Russian troops. And therefore, I have assured Mr. Secretary General that we are treating this situation in a very serious way, and we are watching closely the developments happening there. We are receiving all the signals. I have also offered to Mr. Secretary General to increase the readiness of NATO forces in this part of Europe, along the eastern flank, to consider increasing military presence there, to consider enhancing the air policing mission, all kinds of surveillance missions that are operating there and patrolling that part of NATO border, that part of the eastern flank of NATO, to make sure that all possible aggressors are given to understand that the North Atlantic Alliance is ready, not only that we stand ready to defend the North Atlantic allies, but also that we pay attention to the security of our partners from outside of the alliance with whom we cooperate, with whom we collaborate, such partners as Ukraine, because today the security of Ukraine is really threatened. Since 2014, as we know, Crimea Crimea has been occupied. Also, the Donetsk and Lugansk regions have been under occupation. The situation is still very dangerous there. Practically every day, we can see on the line between Russia and Ukraine exchange of fire. People are dying there, and because we have got additional information on Russian forces being relocated, one should pay special attention to that situation. I also express my gratitude to Mr. Secretary General for his very clear position at the North Atlantic Council meeting when a resolution was taken concerning the support of our country in defending the border of the European Union, in defending the border of NATO. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, that you were so clear in your position. That was very important to us, and let me reiterate once again, we are fulfilling our commitments and our obligations arising under the treaty on the one hand, and also we are fulfilling our obligations which result from our membership in the European Union. We attach a very serious treatment to that. We keep monitoring the security situation all the time in our part of the NATO flank, and in this respect we are also ready to provide constant support. We're in touch on a daily basis with our allies, with Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. They are our neighbors as well, so this is a daily cooperation, and of course we are also in touch with NATO Headquarters, with Mr. Secretary General, and with our allies. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have time for a couple of questions. We'll go to the third row first, TVP.
Dominika Josic, Polish television. I have two questions to both Secretary General and President Duda. Secretary General, you already mentioned answering my questions a little bit, because you mentioned that there is threat of hybrid war, a hybrid attack close to border of Belarus and Poland, but also sending Russian troops around Ukraine. But there is also energy blackmail using by Russia. So my question is NATO analyzing this situation? And do you think that it can be related, all those actions made by Russia and Belarus? And what might be the answer of NATO? What can you do to solve this situation? And question to President Duda. You also mentioned that you would like to ask for reinforcement of NATO presence, military presence in eastern flank of NATO. So do you think that it will be supported by other alliances, for example, Baltic states? And do you hope that you will receive positive answer? Thank you.
Of course, NATO is concerned about the developments and the situation both on the border between Belarus, Poland, Latvia and Lithuania, but also, of course, we are concerned about what we see close to Ukraine with the Russian military buildup. We are monitoring and following these developments very closely. We are vigilant, and when it comes to Poland and the situation on the border with Belarus, we have condemned the actions by the Lukashenko regime, using vulnerable people, migrants, to put political pressure on neighbors. This is inhumane and it's cynical and something that we strongly condemn. We also provided some support with experts to Lithuania earlier in this situation, and we stand ready to further support and help allies, because these are actually three allies which are directly affected by the cynical actions of the Lukashenko regime. We also, of course, monitor closely developments close to Ukraine. This is the second time this year we see a military build-up. We call on Russia to be transparent, to reduce tensions and to de-escalate. We are, of course, providing support to our close partner, Ukraine. This is not a threat to Russia. It's part of our close and well-established partnership with Ukraine, and NATO allies also, of course, stand in solidarity with Ukraine, supporting their territorial integrity and sovereignty. And we will also meet with the foreign minister of Ukraine at our foreign minister meeting in Riga, together with the foreign minister of Georgia. We continue to pursue a dual-tack approach towards Russia. We need to be firm. We need deterrence and defense. But at the same time, we believe in dialogue, meaningful dialogue with Russia, and especially when times are difficult as now, it is important to talk, to try to reduce tensions, and to maintain channels of military lines of communications open to prevent incidents and accidents. And therefore we regret that Russia has closed NATO's offices in Moscow, and that they have suspended their diplomatic mission to NATO. We are ready to meet with Russia, to sit down in the NATO-Russia Council to discuss with them also the difficult and sensitive issues related to this situation in and around Ukraine, because we believe that's the best way to deal with these issues, and we regret that Russia so far has not responded positively, but actually suspended their mission at NATO.
Madam, this is a very complex answer to your question. I will try to give an answer anyway. The situation is complex because we can see developing on 3 different levels. There is a civilian level, a military level, and an energy level. As far as the civilian level is concerned, we are seeing a hybrid attack on the border, first and foremost at the border of the European Union, which is guarded by Poland, because it is the border of Poland at the same time. But we have to focus on the fact that this attack started with the attack on the Belarusian-Lithuanian border, then came the Belarusian-Latvian border, and then Belarusian-Polish border. So, generally we can speak that there is an attack perpetrated against the border of the European Union and the border of NATO at the same time. However, this attack is of civilian nature. We have got groups of migrants. Of course, we have been monitoring the situation closely, we know, and we have got proofs that they were supported, or at least they were pushed, unfortunately, to the border by the Belarusian forces, by uniformed Belarusian officers. So, having said that, there is no doubt whatsoever that, first of all, there was a physical impact taken on them. They were supported, and quite often they are also equipped with dangerous objects, as I mentioned before in my previous intervention, and therefore we can call it a hybrid attack. But today, this is of civilian nature, and the border in Poland is defended by such forces which are provided there to repel attacks of civilian nature. That is, the border guard, Polish police officers in a situation where there were attacks or riots on the border. Then the police officers intervene, and you could follow that on video footages. You could follow that on international media channels. That attack was repelled precisely by Polish police officers. So this is the civilian part. So, as I mentioned before, one can say that this manner of operation, this hybrid attack, the manner of this hybrid attack has changed in so much that before we had those front attacks or frontal attacks during the day, now this has changed into night attacks, attacks by smaller groups of people. But, as I said, unfortunately, they are more aggressive, more dangerously equipped as well, and we're very much concerned about the situation. So this is one side of the coin. The other side is the military problem. And in this respect, we have been watching for a longer time now the build-up of the Russian forces in our part of Europe. For many years, there have been this build-up going on in the Kaliningrad Oblast, but over the last months of this year, we have seen a clear build-up of the Russian forces around Ukraine. Then we had Zapad 2021 maneuver in the vicinity of the border with Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. And we know that part of the Russian forces which participated in those maneuvers stayed behind in Belarus. So in this respect, we can speak about another build-up of the Russian forces close to the eastern flank of NATO. And recently, we have received information that once again, the Russian forces are being strengthened, this time at the Ukrainian border. So this build-up of the military forces of Russia is a fact. It is going on. And one has to be clear and say that if we put these two elements together, we have no doubts that these actions, they have to be coordinated. It's hard to assess it otherwise. We assume that they can be coordinated, first and foremost, politically, and therefore this cautiousness and vigilance from NATO, who is responsible for the military security of the allies, is necessary. How should it be demonstrated? It should be demonstrated through the strengthening of the strategic surveillance of the region, through strengthening of the air policing mission, and I mentioned that in my conversation with Mr. Secretary General, also strengthening of observation, surveillance, and strengthening of the readiness of NATO units along the eastern flank of the alliance. For instance, the allies from Great Britain, from the UK, declared ready to deploy additional units, additional troops to Poland and generally to the eastern flank of NATO. Military support recently has also been declared by our allies from Slovakia, and a similar declaration was communicated by the Czech Republic. So we would like this to be considered by the North Atlantic Alliance, by the NATO headquarters, so that such decisions, both political and military decisions, are to be considered. But it is also our request that the readiness of alliance be increased, that the strategic cautiousness be increased, and especially the monitoring of the situation along the eastern flank of NATO. And the third element, it might be most political of all, is the issue of energy security, gas security. It is hard to speak about the first two levels in detachment, separately from Nord Stream 2, for instance. Limited gas supplies by Russia, the fact that the European gas warehouses are not filled to the levels that we would expect them to be, and the prices of gas have been recently growing rapidly on the global markets and on the European market alike. So, given the fact that the certification process of Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, against which we have been protesting all the time, we are against its construction because we believe it undermines the energy interests of the EU, the energy interests of the European states, and first and foremost, it undermines the energy security of Ukraine, Poland, Slovakia, as well as other countries on the eastern flank of NATO and in the eastern part of the European Union. We believe that this gas pipeline should never have been constructed. It is contrary to the interests of the European countries. It does not increase the diversification of gas supplies whatsoever to the European Union. Quite on the contrary, it limits the diversification. It increases markedly the Russian monopoly, the monopoly of Gazprom, and at the end of the day, it is dangerous for Europe. Therefore, we believe that the certification process should be stopped and that Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline should have never been allowed to be used. And if such a question was considered, it should totally be covered by the third energy package of the European Union. And I have no doubts whatsoever in this respect. So these are the three elements concerning the hybrid attack of civilian nature. Military activity by Russia, the negative energy actions taken by Russia, all these elements have to be considered together, and I think that your question boils down to this.
We'll try to take a couple more questions, including online, so I'd like to ask you to keep your questions short. Polsat.
So if the situation on the border is still so bad, there are still so many attempts of the illegal crossing, did you actually talk about the possibility of using Article 4 and call the formal consultations of the allies? What would have to happen for you to do it? Are you afraid that Russia will treat it as a provocation? And also the question, did you talk about the humanitarian aspect of the crisis, as it is of big concern of many in Europe? Thank you.
Well, also on Article 4, I can only say that we constantly consult here at NATO. We have consulted in the North Atlantic Council. We have consulted bilaterally with Poland and other allies directly involved. We have been briefed and updated. And just the meeting today is also a demonstration that we are consulting closely on these issues with Poland and the other allies involved. And of course, we appreciate the very close contacts between NATO and Poland and Lithuania and Latvia on this very difficult and challenging situation on the border with Belarus. On the humanitarian situation, I would just say that I know that this is an important issue for the Polish government, and therefore I will leave it to the President of Poland to comment on that.
Pani redaktor, tutaj odpowiedź jest
Madam, the
prosta.
question is, the answer is simple here. The situation has not changed from our perspective. The last time that Poland referred to Article 4 was 2014, when Ukraine was attacked militarily by Russia. Article 4, which is, by the way, the article of the North Atlantic Treaty, of the Washington Treaty, it serves to defend military attacks, and it serves to protect in a situation of a military attack. So let me say the following. Of course, together with Mr. Secretary General and with our NATO allies, we are thinking about the possibility of using Article 4. Nevertheless, in order to, we would like to use Article 4 not in a fast way, a rapid way, but when the situation is adequate to Article 4 being involved. And in our assessment today, the situation is adequate to invoking Article 4. Today, we do not have a direct military threat. Today, we are not seeing any military attack on any of the neighboring states where we potentially could expect this kind of strengthening, invocation of Article 4 in increasing security. So, having said that, we keep Article 4 in mind all the time. We know that there is such a possibility, but as I said, now we are at the stage of consultations. However, we are convinced that today there are no bases, no grounds to invoke Article 4. And by the way, I described to you the three different levels on which the situation is developing today. And as you can clearly conclude from what I said, there is absolutely no military attack observed today.
We'll take two quick questions. Sorry, we'll take two quick questions online. Terry Schultz from NPR Deutsche Welle.
Thank you very much to both Mr. President and Mr. Secretary General. First, President Duda, could you just clarify, did you today ask the Secretary General to raise the issue of the enhancements that you mentioned, more policing, potentially more a greater military presence? Did you ask that, or did you just say we should consider it? So just please clarify what the status is of your wishes for that. And do you feel that until now NATO's attempts at deterrence have failed on your border and in Ukraine, because neither of the actions which you say is supported by Russia have diminished at all? And Mr. Secretary General, will you be bringing requests for these kind of enhancements to the allies in Riga? Thank you.
Well, what I can say is that we have expressed a strong solidarity to Poland and other allies directly involved. We have provided and sent some experts to Lithuania because they requested that support, and then we sent and provided some support and help to them. And we constantly assess and are in close contact with Poland and other allies, and we are ready to provide support if so requested. But so far, this has been something that Poland has been able to deal with without direct NATO presence, and also some allies have provided some support bilaterally.
But that's my point. You've done all these things and nothing, and the escalation has continued.
Odpowiadając na to pytanie,
Answering your question, let me say the following. In 2015-2016, when we discussed the presence or the sending of NATO forces to the eastern flank of NATO, I said that after the Russian attack, first against Georgia and then against Ukraine in 2014, NATO had to show that it was alive. NATO had to demonstrate that it was dynamic, that it responded to the current situation, that it was able to provide an adequate response to the times and to the behaviors from the potential aggressors. And NATO provided that kind of response after consultations with Mr. Secretary General in 2015 when it started, then in 2016 up to the NATO summit in Warsaw. All the decisions were consulted and they were taken one by one. As an effect of those decisions, today we have got NATO prisons as part of enhanced forward prisons in the Baltic states and in Poland. There is also tailored forward prisons stationed in Romania. So having said that, as you can see, NATO has demonstrated that it is ready, NATO has demonstrated that it is alive and that it is responsible. And speaking about the question about deterrence, I believe that yes, the answer is yes. The North Atlantic missions, the strengthening of the eastern flank of NATO, has passed the test, and today NATO is still present. But if we are looking at how the situation is developing outside of NATO border, when we are seeing the potentially growing threat, let me stress the word potentially, plus we are receiving information all the time about the Russian buildup, perhaps an aggressive buildup in the direct neighborhood of the Ukrainian border, well, we should ask ourselves the question whether this is not the right time for the NATO to again show the adequate response by at least temporarily strengthening its readiness, at least temporarily strengthening its presence, be it through the deployment of additional units of NATO to the eastern flank of NATO, or perhaps through strengthening the air policing mission or through strengthening other surveillance missions. And these are the issues that today I brought up in my conversation with Mr. Secretary General. These were my proposals resulting from the monitoring of the current situation on the eastern flank, the one for which Poland today is responsible.
And we'll take the final question from Julian Röpke in Berlin from Bild-Zeitung.
Yes, thank you very much. My question goes to Mr. Secretary General and to the President. You have been talking about defense spending of Poland, and Poland is a forerunner there. However, you can see the German new coalition treaty. And my question is to both of you, how do you assess that the NATO 2% spending goal disappeared from it and was instead formulated as a, quote, long-term 3% investment in international action, including diplomacy, development, and, quote, NATO commitments? This is my question to you. Thank you very much.
So I warmly welcome the agreement to establish a new government in Germany. I have known the incoming Chancellor Olaf Scholz for many years, and I look forward to working with him. I also know that he is a strong supporter of our transatlantic bond and committed to NATO, and I will look forward to working with him and his government. Then I also welcome the fact that the platform for the new government states very clearly that Germany stands by its commitments to NATO, that they are focused on how to make sure that the Bundeswehr has equipment as good, should be equipped as good as possible. And I also know that the focus on capabilities and equipping the Bundeswehr is actually very much the same message as what we have agreed in NATO. The 2% is based on requirements, on capability targets, which we expect all allies to meet. And I'm also confident that Germany will continue to increase defense spending. Over the last years, Germany has stepped up, increased defense spending to make sure that they have the capabilities and that they are able to equip Bundeswehr as good as possible. And therefore I also expect and I'm confident that the incoming German government will live up to these commitments. Let me also just add that Germany is a highly valued ally, contributing to NATO missions and operations in many different ways, including in the Baltic region, leading one of the battle groups in the Baltic region in Lithuania, and also supporting NATO's collective defense in many other different ways. So I'm looking forward to welcoming, I'm looking forward to work with, and I'm welcoming the incoming German government.
Panie redaktorze, jeżeli to pytanie jest skierowane do mnie, ja powiem tak.
If I'm supposed to answer your question, then let me say the following.
Ogromny szacunek do naszych,
We have got
naszych
very big
zachodnich
respect
aliantów.
to
Naszym
our Western
zachodnim aliantem,
allies.
wielkim sąsiadem
Our Western ally and our big neighbor is Germany.
Ale patrząc na to z polskiego punktu
But
widzenia,
if you
mogę
take
powiedzieć
the
tak,
Polish
nas najbardziej
perspective, I can
interesuje
say the
nasza
following. We are
sytuacja, to
most
znaczy
interested
kwestia
in
naszej
our own
odpowiedzialności za
situation. So
bezpieczeństwo
the question of our
nie
own
tylko
responsibility for the
wschodniej
security of not
północnoatlantyckiej, ale
only
naszej
eastern flank of
odpowiedzialności za
NATO, but
bezpieczeństwo
our
Polski,
responsibility for the security of
Rzeczypospolitej
Poland,
Polskiej i
the Republic
Z tego
of Poland
punktu
and its
widzenia
citizens.
nie mamy
So speaking from this
wątpliwości, że musimy
perspective, we have
wzmocnić
no
naszą armię.
doubts that we
Nie
have
mamy
to strengthen
wątpliwości
our
co do
armed
tego, że ta
forces.
armia
We
potrzebuje
have no doubts that
modernizacji,
our armed
potrzebuje
forces need to be
wyposażenia w
modernized,
nowoczesny
they need to be
sprzęt.
equipped with modern
Uważamy, że
equipment.
powinna zostać
We believe
zwiększona.
that it
I w
should be
związku z tym,
increased.
niezależnie od naszych
And
zobowiązań
irrespective of our
wynikających z
commitments
zobowiązań sojuszniczych
resulting from
wewnątrz
the
Sojuszu
alliance,
Północnoatlantyckiego,
the commitments that we
gdzie
took
zobowiązaliśmy się
as
do wydawania
allies, where we
co
committed
najmniej
ourselves to
rocznie
spend at least
na
2% of GDP per
obronność.
year on
I po prostu
defense.
te wydatki
Irrespective of that, we
zwiększamy.
are
One już
increasing
znacząco
our
przekraczają
spending, and the spending
2%
is
i
much
będą
higher than
najbliższych
2% right
latach
now,
zwiększone.
and
W tej
they will be
chwili w
increased in the
Polsce
next years to
rozpoczyna
come.
się
Right now, we are starting in
procedowanie
Poland
ustawy, która
the discussions
wprowadza
on a
nowe
new law,
rozwiązania,
which is
jeżeli
introducing
chodzi o
new
budowanie
solutions
polskiego systemu
concerning
bezpieczeństwa,
the construction of the Polish security
budowanie
system,
polskiego systemu obronności.
the construction of the
Wprowadza
Polish
także
defense
nowe
system.
rozwiązania, jeżeli
This
chodzi o
law is also
finansowanie
introducing new solutions
modernizacji
concerning
zakupów
the financing
dla
of the modernization
polskiego
and
wojska.
procurement for the Polish armed
Zakłada także
forces.
zwiększenie
According to this
liczebności polskiej
law,
armii.
the
Zresztą
size of the
proces
Polish armed
utworzenia Wojsk
forces
Obrony
should be increased
Terytorialnej
through
w ciągu
the
ostatnich lat
formation of
ta
the territorial
liczebność
defense
polskiej
forces
armii
in the last years.
systematycznie
The
wzrasta
size of the
poprzez
Polish armed
napływ
forces has been
ochotników,
progressively
którzy chcą
growing.
służyć w
We have
Wojsku
got volunteers signing
My to
up
po prostu
to the
realizujemy,
Polish armed
uważamy to za
forces,
nasz
so we are
obowiązek.
going ahead with
Powtarzam jeszcze
this. We
raz,
believe this
nie
is our
tylko
duty.
sojuszniczy, ale
It is not
przede
only our
wszystkim
duty
nasz
as allies of
obowiązek
NATO, but first and
wynikający
foremost, this is the duty that
konieczności zapewnienia
results from
bezpieczeństwa
the
obywatelom
necessity to
Rzeczypospolitej,
provide security to our
konieczności
citizens,
zabezpieczenia
to
bezpieczeństwa Polski
provide
jako takiej.
security to Poland as such.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.